Hi, I'm Caitlin, and I'm a burner. That's what many people who belong to the community of Burning Man call themselves. If you told me 4 years ago that I'd be standing here giving a talk on Burning Man, I wouldn't have believed you. I was pretty sure I was too square. When I started grad school in tourism at Illinois in 2015, I originally planned to research beautiful beach destinations, like this one. But during class one day, I came across an argument about leisure that changed the course of my research career. Under our current definitions of leisure, we understand leisure activities to be any activity that is freely chosen and enjoyed by someone. But unfortunately, this doesn't take into account what anyone else involved in the activity thinks or feels about it. This means that, for example, a serial killer on a murder spree might be considered to be participating in a leisure activity. Yes, seriously. Serial murder, riding a bike, playing a game of cards, going on holiday, all leisure activities. Yeah, that struck me as problematic too. Definitions matter. The words that we use to define things carry value in addition to meaning. By being willing to call an abusive activity leisure, we are complicit in legitimizing an act that none of us would, on serious consideration, like to condone. What can we do about this problem? Center leisure around consent, of course. This sounds obvious and simple, but represents a radical shift in how we think about and define leisure. Think about our serial killer example. Jack the Ripper may freely choose and enjoy slashing the women of London. The women of London, not so much. They certainly didn't consent. If we call that leisure, we privilege the position of Jack over the position of his victims. Now, serial murder as leisure is an extreme example, but we can imagine other examples that are closer to home and that rely in the same way on the non-consensual participation of one person for the enjoyment of another. A bully choosing to pick on a child on the playground, for example. But when we consider consensual activities leisure, the game changes. We start to respect the bodily autonomy of all people. That has the potential to change lives. I felt that this was deeply important to my field and my own life, but I didn't yet have the evidence to support this theory. It was at this point in the story, over a glass of wine at Radio Maria, that my dear friend Sarge finally convinced me to go to Burning Man, or more specifically, a regional Burning Man event in the Appalachian Mountains known as Transformus, which is one of dozens of such events known as Burns that happen all over the world. Burning Man is an experiment in arts and culture held in the Black Rock Desert of Nevada during the last week of August each year. It draws 75,000 participants from all over the world to live and play in a temporary city that disappears completely at the end of the event. Everyone at the event agrees to try to live by a set of core values known as the 10 Principles. The first event I attended, Transformus, was like Burning Man, except that in addition to the 10 principles, Transformus was the birthplace of a grassroots movement to add an 11th principle to the community. That principle was consent. 11th principle consent was created in response to concerns about consent violations that have been happening at Burning Man. Violations like sexual assault, stealth photography, and dosing. Burning Man is a place where inhibitions are lowered, and that's not a bad thing. The bad thing was that some people were taking advantage of that to hurt others, violating their consent. The 11th Principle Consent Movement is an educational campaign combining both in-person consent education and online educational materials, like the ones you're seeing on these slides. Because of the magic of the internet, some of these resources have even gone viral. At Transformus, this movement also creates a consent culture, which can be seen in opposition to rape culture, which is the culture that, whether we admit it or not, we live in every day. Every person who attended Transformus is taught about consent by a dedicated group of volunteers. These volunteers teach participants simply to ask first before impacting someone's experience, and to respect that no is a complete answer to any question. This culture of consent was based on the idea of enthusiastic consent, one that is informed, explicit, affirmative, and can be revoked at any time. Saying yes now does not mean that I cannot say no later. I cannot stress how important this is. This shared culture of consent, embedded into the very fabric of the leisure event, is key. Consent is relational. It's important in experiences that occur between two or more people. Consent doesn't happen in a bubble. we can't protect it in a bubble either. It takes all of the community working together. My thesis research on consent at Burns was ethnographic. I attended Transformist and many Burns after to see what a consent-centered event was like on the ground. I volunteered with 11th Principle Consent and interviewed people about their experiences at Burns. Somewhere along the way, I started to call myself a burner. What happens when you create a leisure event that has consent culture at its heart? People, and particularly women-identifying people like me, thrive. In the in-depth interviews with participants, every single woman-identifying participant experienced an increase in self-esteem and self-actualization that they attributed to the culture of consent. As one female participant expressed it, quote, "Being able to have consent and think about consent makes me feel safer and lets me be me. It helps me express myself without fear of being hurt or judged." What was also remarkable was that though male-identifying participants didn't experience the same increase in self-esteem and self-actualization as women, they nevertheless universally thought it was important. As one male participant said, "If someone's consent is knowingly violated, then we as a culture have failed in some way." Can you imagine being part of a community like that? I attended Transformist to study how consent could impact the experiences of other people, and I found myself transformed, lifted up by an event culture that valued and respected me and the autonomy that I deserve to have over my own experience. I'd like to see more of that in the world. Thank you.